All right, hello everyone. We are Team 16, the PATS team, Psychological Assessment Tracker and Scheduler, and this is our Lessons Learned presentation. I'm Carson Thrift, here with Kaelyn, Bock, Rebecca Dummit, and Sterling Hayden. So we'll get into our introduction here. Our clients are Dr. Rebecca and Drew Hoovener from Quest Psychological and Counseling Services in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Our solution for them is really designed to help solve their problem of not having an adequate platform for tracking and scheduling psychological testing appointments. So just to explain that a little bit more, they've got two main divisions of their business: psychological testing and then counseling services. They currently have Therapy Notes, which is a software solution to keep track of their patients in counseling services, but they don't have a similar solution for tracking their materials and patients for their psychological testing appointments. So all of their evaluations, written tests, things like that, they use to identify certain treatment routes. They're looking to use our application to track all of that. So a little bit more about our system. It is a web application comprised of three main layers: a database in PostgreSQL, a backend in Java, and a front end in HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and jQuery. As you can see, we tried to emphasize a minimalist design as per our client's request. This was similar to their other solution, Therapy Notes, as well as, they just requested that for any sort of medical software or anything they would be using, that it's easy to use, as normally every client does, but also bigger buttons, really accessible, bright colors, and we also try to stick to their color scheme of kind of lighter blues and whites. Our main features of our application here are scheduling appointments, scheduling staff, and tracking their tests and their relevant testing materials. So you can see our kind of calendar page on the right here. We also use their color coding system of their certain staff being pink or salmon or whatever color, so that they can integrate it into their business and be all that more useful to them. So next we're going to move into what did we learn? This is our lessons learned presentation. We're going to try to convey some of our errors, successes, all sorts of things that we learned. I'll pass it off to Rebecca.
Great. So to get this out of the way, one of our biggest changes and learning experiences during the project was our spring quarter. As we only had about a week of in-person classes, we quickly had to change to an online learning model with the rest of the campus due to COVID-19. Initially, it was slightly different, but we adjusted fairly well as a team, as our clients are based in Virginia and have been meeting with us remotely since the beginning of the year. In terms of team meetings, we decided to stick to our usual schedule of daily meetings, but just host them over Microsoft Teams instead. This was very helpful as it kept each team member accountable for doing their work and helped the group manage their time in an online-only world. The only problems we faced while being remote was providing help for someone stuck on a feature and giving presentations, as it creates a whole level of awkwardness through the computer, like we're recording right now. But as an example, many software companies are completely operational by remote work, so the tail end of this project gave us some experience into what life is like as in a remote job. Many of us learned that we can work effectively this way, which is good, as many graduating seniors may start remotely due to the pandemic, like I will.
Our next lessons learned is about Docker. And for those of you who don't know, Docker is a tool for creating your project in a container so that every time you build, it's a fresh, clean build, and the environment in which you're running it doesn't affect the performance or anything like that. And some of the pros about Docker are it simplifies a lot of your deployment and standardizes everything so where if it runs on your local machine, it should run just fine if you're tossing it up on the server. And a lot of your deployment work at the end will be almost trivial because of how you set it up. However, most of that work's actually just moved to to the start of your project whenever you go to set up Docker. It has a very high learning curve, and once you get it set up, then everything runs fairly smoothly. But there's other little quirks about it that you have to keep in mind whenever you're developing in a Docker project. And because of the shorter amount of time that senior projects end up taking, it's a somewhat ineffective use of time if your client doesn't require it like ours did. And another lesson we learned was how to learn quickly, because of client demands or project demands or just not being familiar with certain tools. There's a lot of new things you're going to have to learn, and you're going to have to learn them quickly to get the project done in time. And some of them require a decent amount of time to get set up, like Docker. So the best advice will be prepared to mess with something that you're not familiar with, and hopefully work with your team to get some of that figured out.
All right, so we divided up our work based on what each of us were interested in rather than based on a specific feature. And for a small project like this, it's really hard to divide up your features into small chunks that one member can focus on. So we ended up having a great balance of interests and had one member who worked in the database, one member who worked in the back end as well as kind of handled the more tricky stuff, and then two who worked in the front end. And this worked out really well for us because we had members working on things that interested them instead of things that they found boring or they just didn't like. We did have to maintain a higher level of communication for this to work, though, as each piece had to be in place before the next member could do their own work. But this did lead to us having better designed features because it forced all of us to sit down together and think through the design and come at it from all those different areas. So like how a database designer might think scheduling a staff member should work could be different than how a front-end designer might think. And having all those perspectives kind of put together allowed us to more efficiently design our features. Also, we didn't really strictly stick to these divisions of work, so if one area slowed down but another one needed help, we'd switch and hop around, kind of help each other out. One of the main benefits that we saw to this was inconsistency of code, because anyone coming in to help out in an area just kind of followed that area's code style, and we didn't have to worry about conflicting styles. And then in terms of team dynamics, you sometimes hear horror stories about teams not working well together. Luckily, our team must have done some things right because we tended to work well together throughout the whole project without any major issues. We like to think that this is due to a regular meeting schedule, as we always allotted time for each team member to get their features done, as well as have the other group members available for any questions or help programming. Having a regular meeting schedule is really helpful whether you're remote or not, to make sure you allot time to the project and it doesn't get left behind as we're all taking other classes. Since there's no set in-class time for senior project, you have to create your own schedule, and this is super important. Additionally, using our Trello board to keep track of tasks was helpful in keeping everyone on the same page with what needs to get done and what people are currently working on. Also, we tried to do daily stand-up meetings for a while to make sure that everyone knew what was happening in the project at all times, and if any problems arose, we would message the other team members instantly to try and figure it out.
So moving on to some miscellaneous dev issues. So Spring Boot live updating did not really work for us. Spring Boot was the platform that we used to host our web application. And live updating would have been very helpful as opposed to rebuilding the entire application whenever we needed to make some changes. This hurt productivity, quite a bit. It added up over time, even though it only may have taken 3 to 5 minutes to build our application. That just adds up over time. Another thing we faced was browser updates. So some of our front end inputs or formatting would change based on new browser updates or things. As with any web application, this is kind of out of our control. And so just some things to keep in mind and watch out for as you're going forward. Also, our team did not really determine a specific development environment. So some of us working on the back end may have been working in, Eclipse or some other Java editor, while some of us in the front end were working in Visual Studio. And this caused some auto formatting issues in some of our files, especially in the HTML with some of our JavaScript. It caused it to kind of rearrange and sometimes not work properly.
And last but not least, one big difference between senior project and many other classes is that your project actually has a real client, and it's not just one of your professors. Here's some of the tips and tricks that we pulled from classes like 371 and our own experience to make working with a client easier. The first is obviously communication. Many clients like ours are not local to Terre Haute, so you're going to have to establish good communication practices to make sure both parties are up to date. This is fairly easy to establish during the first quarter of the project, as you're going to have to meet with them often to make sure you're receiving all of their requirements. And then once you start to begin to develop in later quarters, you should carry these frequent meetings to make sure that the client is constantly in communication with you. For our team, it worked out to be a weekly meeting every Friday, and we stuck to that until the end of the project. Second is that even though you think your team will have all the requirements down at the beginning of the project, the client will try to change things up on you later in the year. Some things are totally feasible, as it may be a really small feature that they suggest and you can get done in a week, but some can be completely out of scope from what they originally wanted, and you have to be prepared to tell them what you can and cannot add to the project. And lastly, don't be a victim to feature creep. Towards the end of the project, you're going to want to squeeze plenty of other features in before you hand off the project, but understand you're on a time limit and you shouldn't start implementing things that won't get finished. It looks bad to the client, it looks bad on you, and you want to make sure that you hand them a polished application. And more importantly, make sure that you have fun with your client, as it's a good way to establish a good relationship with them. And just some final points to wrap up our whole presentation. More importantly, make sure you manage your time. You're going to drown out senior project with all your other classes, so make sure you're meeting with your group members and you get all of your stuff done. And a good way to do this is to manage your time through a timesheet. Make sure you're logging how long it takes you to do certain features, as most of your advisors are going to ask you to do that anyway. You're also going to have to learn a lot on the job. You're going to be thrown into things that you don't know or understand, so you're going to have to learn a lot on your own. There isn't really a textbook on how to make your project, so you're going to have to rely on your team members and resources on the internet to make sure that you get everything down. And regardless of what preventative measures that you take, something will definitely go wrong. Just accept it and be ready to work with your team members to solve the problem when the time comes. And overall, just be a good team member to the rest of your group, do your fair share of work, and be a good consultant to your client.
Overall, good luck. Thanks. This has been our lessons learned presentation from Team 16. And best of luck on your senior project for next year.